Hi, Dragon Con. Thank you for joining us for our BritTrack panel on Victoria. In this panel, we'll cover Victoria Season 3 and how it fits with the overall show. Also, we're going to discuss predictions of what we have upcoming in Season 4. Joining me now, I have Rob Levy. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rob Levy. I do stuff with neatcoffee.com, and I write for anglotopia.net. So if you are a fan of British popular culture, British history, British TV, that might be a place you want to check out. This is my, Angel, I know you've been here forever, but this is my 25th year doing programming for the track. And it feels weird not having to run to the Marriott right now.
Thank you for joining us. And Robert Ross?
Hi, I'm Robert Ross, and I'm a best-selling Audible author of the urban fantasy series Sentinels of Creation and the just launched science fiction series called Paradigm 2045. I've been coming to the con for over 10 years, first as a fan, and then over the last 4 or so years as an attending pro. So I'm really excited to be part of the programming, and hopefully next year we will all be once again together. I love to hide little goodies throughout the con. So I'm having to do them virtually this year. So if you want some freebies and some free goodies, you can come to my site, spartamac.com, and then there'll be a big Dragon Con friendly message for that's a secret for all of the Dragon Con people.
Awesome. Thank you. And we have at BritTrack's Mark.
Hey, my name's Mark Heffernan. I'm like Angela. I'm on the BritTrack volunteer group. I've been doing this will be my 3rd year working with the BritTrack. If you have been following along, I did a series of shorts called Hidden Gems, where we talk about some more unusual British shows that are out there. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Those will be airing on the BritTrack Facebook and I think YouTube throughout the con.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, awesome. So diving in on Victoria Season 3, the first 2 episodes focus on the revolutions of 1848. What are your guys' opinions of these revolutions in the series, or the treatment of these revolutions in the series? Don't answer all at once.
Well, I think it's interesting when you try to tackle historical moments in television. It's one thing to do it in film, but in television, it's almost impossible to do unless you're having a show with an arc like this, or like they're doing with the Queen with some of their storylines. So I think the nature of the show lends itself to telling those stories. But I think in looking at the construct of Queen Victoria's reign, that whole era of revolution is significant because it sort of sets the table for everything coming later in their relations with France and their relationships with Prussia. And I think you have to know that defining moment because it really affected decisions that came later. Before that, the world, everything la 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 la, and then boom, there's all these revolutions. It's like, okay, we are not, permanent. We're not something that can always be around, Right. And as much as we love being royalty, and as much as we might have the people behind us, this can go away in the drop of a hat. So it sort of made them a lot of royal families. It made them think about the aspects of diplomacy, sort of to their monarchies, in terms of like it's just no longer an autocratic rule. They have to cut deals with prime ministers. They have to, be more involved in everyday to-day activities of ordinary citizens. They had to sort of know what was going on about more things, I think. So I think the treatment of the revolution really, those revolutions helped viewers understand the context of those times and why Victoria is so angst-ridden and why Albert is so worried and why relationships with Parliament are the way they are. But it also, I think, sets the stage for all the tension. You have to do that because it sort of is the tension that gets the series going. and it tells a lot of the other stories because a lot of the reactions coming from that set the table.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One of the things I found interesting, because I juxtapose it, and I know the focus of this is on Victoria, but I juxtapose some of this from what we see in The Crown, and then what we see today happening with the royal family, and with the Megxit, I guess, if we were to breach the subject even briefly. So I think that what you see is that first realization that this monarchy may not endure. One of the things that about the revolutionary pieces that I found a little bit disappointing was, and maybe I'm missing something, but didn't they change actors between for the King of France between what season 2 and 3? Did they not?
I don't know. I'm a bad person to ask.
Okay, because there was a scene where Victoria visits the king as he gets his throne back, and he's taking him through this little arboretum or whatever, and they're eating oranges. And then you see him in this season as an impoverished beggar on the stairs within Buckingham Palace, and you see that shift between everything that's taken away from them. And Albert, you see, sees it, and Victoria's like, we're not a revolutionary people. The British are not a revolutionary people. That's not who we are. And you see that again with Philip in The Crown, going back to Elizabeth. And now today, obviously, Elizabeth is still with us. And you see that kind of playing out as whether or not the monarchy can endure the change of the guard whenever that occurs with Elizabeth to Charles, or if Charles is skipped directly to William.
I think what's interesting about it is when you're talking about the revolutionary stuff, that's what they were worried about with the Chartists there, in England, is if they allowed them to present their, I can't remember what it's called, but their whatever, that basically it was going to start a revolution in England, because it wasn't just France where a revolution happened. There was revolutions all over Europe. There was an especially big one in Austria, and it was a reaction to the very reactionary period after the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, you had Metternich's system that lasted from like about 1815 to 1848, and basically it fell apart in 1848. And if you're in England at the time, you're looking across the channel to France, Austria, and you're wondering, could that happen here? Right.
Germany, Italy, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a revolutionary environment, and could it happen here? And I think the worry was the Chartists would be the start of it in England, and that's the reason why you saw the government so opposed to the whole Chartist thing, because they were worried if the Chartists gained any traction that it would lead to a revolution in England.
Right.
And I think if the British were any other than they were, it could very well. But I mean, that's part of it. It's interesting how culturally, I mean, the Brit is the person that excuses themselves for having to run into your knife that you're holding. I apologize for getting blood all over your knife. So they're just, it would be impolite to revolt, So it's interesting. But I think if they were any other than they were, and I think if the monarchy was any less flexible, I mean, we see that today, how rigid people think it is, but there is a lot of flexibility in terms of and respect for the two parts of a government and the crown. And again, I think you see that across these series where I think it's the crown is eternal and the government is efficient, and the eternal and the efficient have to work together in order to make the people successful. And I think that's marvelous.
That's a great lead into my next statement/question. So we see a changing maturity of Victoria in her relationships with politicians throughout the series. you know, the start with Melbourne and her dependency on him. And then it's growing maturity. So what are your thoughts about her relationship with Melbourne versus her relationship with Palmerston?
Well, I love Palmerston. I didn't like him at first. I really disliked him vehemently. And then, what's that?
Love to hate him.
Yeah, I really did. But then his arc continued. I was like, wow, this guy is really an intriguing cat. With Melbourne, my inclination, which I think was fanned by the women in my house, was to create some fanfic around the two of them, because they were constantly shipping the two of those. And Rufus Sewell does part of that because he's just an amazing actor who played Melbourne. But I thought that was, I loved how they, obviously it's historical, so they couldn't do it, but I loved how that relationship was so I think almost selfless, where he just nurtured her along, and as she became all that he saw that in her at the beginning, he retreated back to what was it,
Brockett
Hall, yeah. And I was so sad when he passed in that film, but after she brought him the bird, but I thought that was so classically what you read about Victoria and of the monarchs, where she refused to embarrass him by letting him see her sadness, which is again so very British. And then she left knowing that she wouldn't see him again.
Yeah. What about you, Rob?
They're different in that Melbourne's more sort of like a mentor and a teacher and a guide. And there's this sort of weird, and historians have been kind of back and forth on this, there's this sort of weird tension, like romantic interest tension with those two that may or may not, no one really knows. But with Palmerston, you know, it is at the beginning a very, very rough and ready sort of trial by fire. But I think the friendship that she developed with Melbourne sort of served as a blueprint for how she's going to deal with Palmerston. And I think, you know, I love watching their scenes, or even his scenes, because he's one of those actors that you look at him and he's just got this like perpetual, look at me, I'm clever, smug things going on. Mm-hmm. So you tend to, it makes his character a little more believable as Palmerston, because you tend to think this guy is always up to something, or he's always a step ahead. And I think that she realizes that, you know, this guy may actually be the smartest guy in the room. I might want to listen to him, you know? And I think that sometimes, again, this could be effect of the revolution. She realizes that she's going to need to be friends, or at least be cordial with someone who is not only a power broker, but also understands how the rest of the world is working in a way that she doesn't. And I think that's the whole key to their relationship. You know, Melbourne teaches her how to be a queen and how to use her authority and, you know, get comfortable in her own skin. And Palmerston, I think her relationship with Palmerston not only sort of reaffirms and underscores that, but I also think that it sort of gives her a lesson in world politics. I mean, she can't run out and grab The Economist in 1851. So having Palmerston around is probably the next best thing she could have, because he seems to know everybody and he seems to know everything that's going on. So there is some of that learn from the guy, but there's also, you know, I better be friends with this guy because it could go badly if I'm not. There is some of that too. So
there's some of that, but I also think she's got a very much more adversarial type relationship with Palmerston than she did with Melbourne.
Yeah,
very much.
And she's not afraid at this point to actually chastise Palmerston when he does something she doesn't particularly like, because that happens at least once, if not several times during the run.
I know.
And the one thing I'll say about Palmerston is he actually, at least in the show anyway, I don't know if this was true in real life, but Palmerston basically dominates the prime minister.
Yeah.
I mean, the Prime Minister is basically his Palmerston's lapdog there for a while. And eventually, of course, Palmerston does become Prime Minister on his own, although we don't see that in the series.
No, we don't. Yeah.
To Rob's point earlier, I think that Palmerston teaches Victoria the power of the people. And I thought one of the most powerful scenes, which is brief, but was when Palmerston is walking and he sees the bootlegged images of Victoria and her family in the etchings. And he sees how the people who don't have a lot of money are shelling out their pences for these images of the Queen and her family acting domestically. And he says, this is what they want to see. They want to, and he just really had his finger on it. And I think that really demonstrated, because she was furious, obviously, from that had leaked out. And I think that it was one of those tipping points for her reign in realizing that even the eternal, giving them glimpses of the things that remind them of us, is a good thing.
Exactly. So during the season, we were introduced to several different new characters. One of those being Victoria's half-sister, Fedora. I like the grimaces here. So what are your guys' thoughts on this storyline? Why don't you start, Mark?
To be honest, I am not a fan of Theodora, at least in the series. I don't know what she was like in real life. But to me, she kind of really felt like a leech. I mean, she was there to take advantage of Victoria's generosity, basically. And frankly, I didn't care much for her character at all, you know. And that was one of the things that, you know, as we get on with some of the other new characters, to be honest, I was not as much of a fan of the new additions as maybe I should have been.
Yeah.
Of the new additions, I think Theodora was probably the better. So we'll get into those other ones, I'm sure, but I just did not like her character at all. And you know, I'm not sorry if she does not come back.
What about you, Rob?
I think, you know, every family has her in it, and I think it added a nice sort of domestic disharmony to the show that was good. For me, it was nice to know that, you know, I might have the same familial dysfunction as the Queen of England. You know, that's kind of cool. But I mean, the great that I love about this show is that, like Palmerston, the woman playing this role is completely captivating in the role of a really awful person. Like, they have the best awful persons on that show. Like, you really, I mean, you know they're doing their job because you don't like them, right? I mean, she is not there to be warm and fuzzy, and she is very, very, very much not warm and fuzzy. So, you know, it was kind of like, I thought she was an intriguing character because it really added the dimension to the show, in that not only is she worried about her crown from outside the palace walls, now she's got to worry about it inside, and that's a whole new beast, right? So that's kind of nice to have as well. It's kind of nice to know that other people have family problems, but she is absolutely like the worst relative ever. And although I'm sure there's worse, but that's her job. She's supposed to do. I think part of the reason I don't like her character at all is because the woman playing her is doing such a great job.
Robert, any comments?
My mom told me if I don't have anything nice to say, then I'm sure the actress is a wonderful human being, but I just kept hoping one of those massive candles that are all lit fell on her. I didn't. I wasn't a fan. I was kind of surprised. Like, why wouldn't you just kick them the hell out? You know, like, you're out, get out, you're done. But you know, they covered all the different reasons. But no, I was not a fan.
Although, interestingly, I'll just add this, you know, talking about, you know, actors playing a really bad character. I did like Palmerston quite a bit. So, and you're not supposed to like him, but I did.
I liked him too. I don't know. I mean, because he seemed to have evolved. I don't know that Theodora evolved at all.
Yeah,
it seemed like she had sparks of it.
I think that's part of it. Is I feel Palmerston had a better story than Theodora did.
Well, no, you see growth with Theodora. It's all about what can she get out of this relationship, and you know, it comes down to you know, who is my daughter going to marry?
Yeah, and I think some of her story hasn't been told yet. Yeah. So I think she gets even better.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it includes that candelabra falling on her. I'm hoping. That'd be awesome.
Well, and I would say with Palmerston, you see him grow, and you learn more and more about him, and he's really not as bad as he's the image that he's projecting for himself. I think.
Is he coming back? Because I know that the actor apparently is very similar to the character, and he is creating all sorts of ripples in the island. So I didn't know if he was coming back or not.
I'm assuming that he is. I mean, I know there's a long break for filming, but they're going to have to bring everybody back, I would think.
Well, and I looked through earlier. You asked about the King of France. There's only one listed on IMDb, so I think it's the same person.
Well, they did a great job of making him look really different, because the first guy was that flamboyant, you know, pork chop sideburns and just like, look at my orange. And then this other guy just coming in and just bedraging. That's great.
Yeah. So talking about relationships and new characters, and Mark brought this up in a conversation offline. So what about Joseph the Footman and Sophie the Duchess? What did you guys think of that storyline?
I think it's fine. I mean, I think you sort of have to. I mean, some of this is you kind of see a ripple effect of Downton Abbey now and all these period drama. You know, they have to kind of humanize, and there were. I mean, they can historically track what happened with these people's servants and things. It is not unheard of for this type of thing to have happened. I don't know necessarily the correct historical context or whatever of this, whether it did or didn't, but I think, you know, you need, in order to connect with viewers and in order to have a full season to make this story expansive, you have to have other characters and other events. So I think if the series is just Victoria, Albert, their politics, and their family, that's 4 episodes. I mean, you're done, right? But all these other things going on, it makes it a little more compelling. But I think also having ordinary people have storylines in it gives a launching point for sort of new viewers that may not be familiar with the monarchy or anything, you know, because one of the things I've heard about the people had to struggle with watching Victoria and the Crown and some of these other historical things is that they have to wrestle with understanding all the history. Mm-hmm. And I think by doing things like that, it makes it a little more accessible as an entryway for people. And so I'm wondering if some of this is that. But I mean, I was fine with it. I didn't think I thought the actors were great. The story got a little cheesy in places, but it's going to. It's an English period drama, so.
Well, and so I'm of the opinion, and I'm just going to throw this out there real quickly, that, you know, the love story that everyone imagined between Victoria and Melbourne, they're trying to build off of that in further seasons and trying to draw in the audience that way. So they can't have a love story with Victoria and somebody else, so they have to have some
spoilers,
sub-characters, right?
Yeah.
Do any of you guys watch it with your spouses?
Oh yeah.
You guys watch it? So I watch it with my spouse and my daughter, and they yell at the screen. So they did not like that arc. So what they were like is, no woman in that era would do that. Oh my God, they would get caught. That would ruin her life. Oh my God. So they're yelling at the screen. My wife is pulling up like research, like papers are flying. She's trying to prove her point. I'm just trying to hear the show. And I love the part of the Duchess and the relationship with her husband. Not that it was a good relationship, but I really, that's another actor who if I saw him in the street, I'd be inclined to punch him in the face, right? You got to withdraw because it's not really him. But that part I thought was really good, and I thought it diminished it with the footman aspect. It seemed a little tropey, and but I'm also biased now because my wife and daughter were screaming at the television set for like 4 episodes.
Well, I mean, to be honest, they're actually correct. That would not have probably happened in real life in the Victorian times, because there's no way a duchess would have fallen for a footman. You know, anybody who follows history realizes it's a little bit unrealistic. Now, of course, Victoria isn't supposed to be completely realistic. To be honest, my whole opinion on that entire arc is I feel Sophie could have done so much better than her husband, and even Joseph. She should have went for somebody else, because she was a much better person than either.
And she had the money too, right? She was the one that had the money, I think, for her husband, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, that post-revolutionary world opened up the classes. You know, the idea of classes going up and down way more than it was before. So it was, although rare, not necessarily something that didn't happen. I mean, it happened at least twice with the Habsburgs, and we know that it happened with the Romanovs, but it's not, they didn't set it up in a very believable way. You know, if it would have happened, I mean, I could see it happening more in the context of Victorian times in other parts of Europe before England, because I still think that even though the revolutions had happened and their minds are a little more open, there's still that sort of rigid reserve in place that I'm not sure would just waver.
But England at the time was much more conservative than Europe.
But at the same time, you know, love is love, and it does crazy things.
It does create that contrast. I think Mark or Rob, you may have mentioned earlier about the Downton connection, but it had dustings of the Branson and
that's what I thought.
Yeah,
Sybil
and Sybil's, yeah. Although they were much more adorable.
But you're starting to see in the literature of that period times too. I mean, that's when you start seeing these works of fiction and things where lower class people marry upper class people, and so you sort of see that romantic notion developing in the pop culture of the period. So is that developing sort of out of a wish, you know, for it to be like the monarchy, or is that developing because it may or may not have happened? I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but we get into the whole Mr. Brown thing later, where Victoria may or may not have had an affair with one of her servants. I mean, so it does. As much as I like to think it's not possible, I have to look down the road later and go, I don't know. But I think in this particular instance with that particular character, it may not have been fleshed out enough or developed enough. I think they needed to sell it a little more than they did, if nothing else.
I think it would have helped if maybe it had continued in the series 4.
I think you know, plant the seeds there and make it build a little and work it, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys know, on PBS's Masterpiece website, they have a fact or fiction. And I was reading this. So an affair did happen. I don't know if it was with a footman or not. And the storyline kind of happened out the same way. Some things, of course, you know, were changed for bringing in the audience, but something did happen there, which I found interesting.
I mean, Daisy Goodwin is pretty painfully drawn to making this as accurately historically as possible.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know, even when people do that, there's still liberties to it. And keeping track of who did what in that household is kind of
so many
mind-boggling.
In that household.
Yeah, I think stripping against the silverware, probably not so much.
Not so much. Okay, let's take a different turn here. So in episode 4, Albert's offered the chancellorship of Cambridge. Then he discovered it was merely something that had been arranged to give him something to do, more of a figurehead type position, not due to any personal merit of his own. What do you think about Albert's reaction, and how would you guys react in this situation? Let's start. Go ahead, Rob.
I'd love to run Cambridge if they gave it to me, but they never will. You know, they filmed Harry Potter there. No, they filmed that in Oxford? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want to run Cambridge. But at the same time, everybody wants to get a job based on merit, not necessarily position, in theory. So I think, I think looking at it with this series and how they fledged out Albert, they spent a lot of time in that season making Albert just want to be more. It's like the old Army commercials, be all that you can be, He's really, really trying to find himself and find a way. I mean, he's got these two polar things, these two constructs sort of tugging at him. He's got the wanting to be more and make society better and rise above his position and sort of make it into something and build something, right? But at the same time, he also has this sort of nagging inferiority complex. It kind of gets a little whiny. It borders on the whiny sometimes about like, I need something to do. It's like we've been wanting something to do and we give it to you. Now you're complaining about that. It's like, shut up, dude. But at the same time, I think he really, that sort of German aristocracy likes the idea of merit-based reward. That's sort of a thing they do. And I think that's more of a cultural difference than a class difference. So I think he wants to earn his own way in a way that we see now with both of the princes in England. They both want to earn their keep. So I don't necessarily think it's too bad, but I think it's interesting because everyone always talks about Victoria, and that's perfectly fine. But Albert on his own was a pretty towering and significant figure, and I think that really reminds audiences of that as well. That this is a power couple, and each of them on their own can do different things, and I like how they brought that in.
Awesome.
So I think there's also an interesting gender roles thing going on.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I mean, which is it may be hard for us to appropriate fully because we're much more egalitarian, but I gotta believe that coming from, and you see some of this with Albert's father, right, or his supposed father, so you're coming from an area of male dominated society. You're going into a situation where I assume it was similar to how it was with Elizabeth and Philip, where he had to subjugate himself to the Queen during her coronation, kneel before her, pledge fealty, not only as a subject but as a husband. So you have that all rolling through your head, and then it creates an additional desire for you to break free of that role. So whereas you said how would we feel? Personally, I wouldn't care. You give me the role. If you're stupid enough to give it to me because of something that's some immutable trait I have, that just gives me the opportunity to show you what an idiot you are, because I'll change things around, or I'll fail miserably. But either way, give me the shot. I'll do it. But I totally see where he would be coming from with all these other gender-related pressures around him, and trying to strain at the bit to go past him. And I think that you see that a lot in his relationship with Victoria.
Absolutely. My thing with it is I would have been fine with it. If they want to make me run Cambridge and not have to do anything, great. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just easy. You just sit down, whatever. But I do think during the time that we're talking about, he took on a very difficult role when he married Victoria, because he wasn't going to be the king. He was just going to be the husband. In most monarchies in Europe at the time, it was the king who ran things. So he took
That's a great point.
He took on a very difficult role. He was not going to be the crown. He was just going to be the husband to the crown. Right. And that's a very difficult role for a man in the 19th century to take. Right. And of course, he's going to want to have something to do, because that, otherwise he's going to feel emasculated.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
my daughter noticed something that I thought was really funny during that scene. She's like, he's upset now about that. they had him on a poster looking like a sausage. So there's this because we had to pause it. I mean, what are you talking about? We had to go back and pause it, and there's like a sticker on the side of a building where he's becoming the prince, and there's Albert, like he looks like an Oscar Mayer wiener in a bun with a little German hat with a poke with the stick on it, and she's like, he didn't like that, but this is worse.
Wow. So, talking about Albert, I want to wrap our discussion with season 3 and look at the Great Exhibition. Albert was able to pull it off despite numerous obstacles, including Victoria herself. The Great Exhibition now is remembered as one of the highlights of the early reign of Victoria. To me, it's odd to see it without the benefit of hindsight, to see the doubts and how it was expected by most to fail. What were your thoughts about this? And are there any other episodes like this where seeing the events from the other side of history, as it were, changed the way you thought about history itself?
Great question.
Thank you.
Too good a question. We're like, uh-oh.
No, I mean, I love the idea of the Great Exhibition. And it's interesting because, when you go over there now and you walk around, there's, what's left from it, but it's it is one of the things that helps sort of kickstart this revolution, right? This industrial and economic era of change. And it also was, again, an underlying theme that I think we're going to get to in the new season, that Victoria and Albert are thinking globally, yes, they have an empire, but if they do this exhibition, it is a way of underscoring the fact that this is a global. It's going to have more of a global, because at this point the show's been more insular, and I think now it's going to be more global as you get to the Crimean War and some of the things happening later. And I think it's sort of a nice little way that they're sort of preparing us for like a bigger palette in terms of what the storylines are going to be. As for looking at, I'm horrible at looking at history stuff because I will be the person that finds everything wrong with stuff. Like, no, they didn't have cars in 1937 that flew. What are you doing? Or that guy's wearing I'm not going to mention, but there's one historical movie where like there's a guy wearing a digital watch and he's in armor fighting, right? So, I mean, yeah. So, I try not to get lost in that because I want to be able to enjoy it and enjoy the suspension of disbelief and not have to be ruined. But I thought this did a nice nuanced job of bringing all that to the forefront without being awful. And I think that, a lot of these period drama shows, they have to do a lot. The amount of work they have to do is really immense in terms of getting everything right. So I'm almost afraid to speak on it because so many people put in time and energy, and I'm going to come along and be, be the guy that,
don't be that guy, right?
Rains on their parade, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. Just the architectural work to create this. I guess what was the world's largest greenhouse, essentially. That seemed amazing. But I guess from a slightly philosophical perspective, I think this is at the point which I'm not as good a historian as my wife is. I think this is the point where the sun never set on the empire, on the British Empire. If not, it was somewhere around then, right? And there was so much fear about, well, what if we bring these people in? They're going to bring their ideas in. And Albert was like, well, we have the best ideas. We have the best of everything. So let them bring their ideas in. And I think that there's a lesson for that today. Those countries that are transparent and open and let other societies freely express their ideas are confident and willing to change if there's somebody brings in a better idea. And then you see the other societies that are closed and you can't come here. And if you do come here, you can say this, but not this. These are the people with the bad ideas. And that sunlight that Albert was inviting in is the best disinfectant for even some of the bad ideas that might have been taking root within Britain. But then they could subsume the better ideas they may not have even known took place.
Awesome.
I think it's also important to remember that the exhibition happened in 1851, only 3 years after the revolutions of 1848, and it's really projecting a strength of the British Empire in some ways. Despite all the revolutions of 1848 that happened over in Europe, look at what we're doing here without having the revolutions that they had over in Europe. We have this great empire. We're having this great exhibition. So it's a great way to project to other nations how strong Britain is at the time.
Yeah.
Because at the time, it was probably the biggest power in the world at that time.
I believe it was. Yeah. So that wraps season 3. Let's move on to season 4. So I think we saw the end of season 3 aired in March of 2019. At that time, Victoria and Jenna Coleman were at the same age. So Jenna Coleman in life and Victoria in the storyline. So Jenna Coleman has been very pointed in saying, joking about being fitted with prosthetic jowls and aging as Victoria, if you will. So do you think the show needs to follow the example of The Crown and recast the principal actors? If they did, do you have anyone in mind for the roles?
Well, I think for the next season, at least for season 4, I think they should stick with the same cast, at least up until, spoiler alert for anybody who doesn't know this, up until the death of Albert. I think they should stick with the same cast. After that, then we can maybe look at possibly recasting if they want to go that way. But I think for the next series, at least, I'm assuming that what they're going to do is they're going to cover, the Great Exhibition was 51. Albert dies in 1861.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is the next season will probably be those 10 years. Unless they're going to go a lot slower than that.
Well, I think they're going to speed it up.
I think they are too, because they've been going slower than The Crown has. Crown's been going a lot faster, running through Elizabeth's life than Victoria has. So, but I think for the next season, at least, I think we should keep the same cast. Be interested what the Rob and Robert think.
One of the problems that each show, both The Crown and Victoria, both had, is that they both are being made in production at the same time. So it is impossible for one not to be alive without being compared to the other.
Right.
So it's very hard to sort of separate and yank them apart, right? And I think, the original plan for Victoria, from what I understand, was it was going to be 5 seasons. And for me, I know season 5, they're still working on it, but they've promised like a death, and they're still trying to figure out exactly what Prince Albert died from. Some people thought it was Crohn's disease. Some people thought it was 2 or 3 other things. So ideally, I would just do 5, because The Crown, we don't know with The Crown how much this is going to lag on, but it would be not, I think you're right, Mark, in that ending it with the death of Albert would be a nice little place to jump off and then scroll the credits saying, this is what Victoria did later, right? Because I think that 5 years is a good number. I'm guessing that with Jenna talking about prosthetic jowls and things like that, is kind of her saying, I kind of would like to do some other things. Right. I'm kind of getting, and I think with that particular 5 years, you get what, 2 more seasons? Yeah, 2 more seasons. So I think that would be a decent amount of time to kind of get everything wrapped up. I mean, this season you could do the Crimean War, some of the stuff with France, and Albert gets sick, and then the next season, there he goes. So, and then she founds Torchwood. So,
nice.
Yeah. And so I think, Yeah, I think 5's a good year to do it. I just, this, as much as it works in The Crown with the casting, and as much everyone likes to say, ooh, who's going to be after a while, it gets kind of trite, and you're just kind of like, don't drag it out. I like the fact, I love both shows for different reasons, and I like the way that the pacing is at Victoria. And I think this whole different cast and different acting, it messes with the feel and the temperament. And, 5 seasons seems very PBS. I know they're not thinking of PBS now when they make it on ITV, but it seems, it's a nice ending spot, I think. And I think that it spares a lot of hassle trying to get somebody to play a later Victoria. And honestly, I mean, most of the interesting stuff she does in her life is this stuff. There's a lot of, she doesn't really, the series after Albert dies, yeah, you get Mr. Brown, and she does a lot of things, but she doesn't really leave the house. She's not wearing a lot of other clothes. She's wearing black, and she's not leaving the house. This is not exactly a party that we're going to get after that. So that's the other reason too.
That's a good point. What about you, Robert?
So I'm not sure. Excuse me. Let me clarify Mark's point. Was your point not to change actors, or did you think that the show should end with Albert's death?
I just mentioned at least for the next season or 2 seasons, as Rob mentioned, at least up until Albert's death, I don't think they should change the actors. Now, if they go beyond Albert's death, then possibly. Personally, I'd like to actually maybe see the series go a bit beyond that. Even though she doesn't do a lot, you'd have some interesting personal interactions there. Especially her and Disraeli and Gladstone. I'd love to get to that point.
So I think I'm more in your excuse me, in your camp. Although I guess I'm in half of each of your camps. So I look at the at Benjamin Buttons, and I go, we can do whatever we want to do. Jowls, CGI, whatever. Now, Jenna may not want to do it, but I wasn't a huge fan of the change in characters in The Crown, although I became a good fan of it because the acting is just spectacular. BBC just rocks it. I also think that Matt Smith, there's a little too much Doctor Who in Matt Smith's performance to go too much further into the future, which is why I think it's good to change actors. But with Victoria, you have one, Albert's going to go away, unfortunately. And I think that one of the things that's interesting to explore is that I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but Victoria is one of her nicknames, I guess, is the mother of Europe, or the grandmother of Europe. In that her kids, 9 of them, right? Mm-hmm. They went out and they spread out throughout Europe into the great houses, and that influence. So I think showing how some of that happened, and how that diaspora from her into Europe, and how that it then impacted the Edwardian age and so forth, I think would be interesting to explore. I wouldn't want to have to write it, because to Rob's point, I think it's a heavy lift to try to make that interesting. But as a viewer, I don't have to write it, right? I have to write my own stuff. So I'll let them make it interesting, but I would love to see it continue on with Jenna as an actor.
Well, I almost think a series with Gladstone on its own would be great, just because there's so much there. So
yeah, Disraeli and Gladstone would be a great series just on their own, because there's 2 such opposing characters, and you'd be real interesting. Yeah. But to your point on about her children going out and marrying, the crowned heads of Europe, we're going to see at least a little bit of that if they at least go up to Albert's death, because the oldest child, Victoria, gets married in the late 1850s to the German heir. Yeah. So we're gonna see some of that anyway, even if they end it with Albert's death.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll end with Albert. I think we're going to see him die relatively quickly. I think that's my prediction on the way the show's going. Because she did say that there's going to be a death of a major character.
It could be mid-season too, but there are other people that are characters in this now that also do die young. Yeah. So I don't know.
We'll see.
It's yeah.
So
hopefully the Duchess's husband gets run over by a bus that mysteriously transports itself to Victorian England.
Yeah, I mean, her parenting skills aren't exactly great. I mean, Leopold's a real winner.
No.
You know, and it is interesting. I mean, it is interesting how it does, without digging too deep in this, mirror a lot of things in our contemporary world, how all these folks get married off in the 1850s and 60s, and we're feeling it today. So it's just very weird. So
do you guys have any closing comments? I'll give you guys each a moment.
I'm curious to hear what you think, because you've asked all the questions, and we're all dudes. So
no, I'm the moderator. I don't have to answer questions.
Oh, okay. All right.
What are you curious? What's my viewpoint on what?
On some, like some of the questions about should the series go longer, and where you think it's headed.
Well, see, I think that Albert died really early in Victoria's reign, didn't he? I mean,
relatively.
Relatively early.
She had a very, very long reign, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I see your point that, after he died, she was in black, and it could be very boring, but then a lot of things happened after he passed away as well.
Yeah.
So I think the story is called Victoria. It's not called Victoria and Albert.
Yeah. But I'm just wondering, I mean, she does a lot of great stuff, but she doesn't make a lot of personal appearances. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of political intrigue and stuff. So they're going to have to, if they want to make it work, they're going to have to write really well.
Yes.
And they're going to have to make it work. Now, the one thing I do want to see with this, if it goes on, that I don't think a lot of people are necessarily talking about, is I think it would be great for a show like Victoria to succeed with an older female lead.
Yes.
Because we don't see that in television like we should. And so for that reason, I think it's important, and I know it's not Victoria and Albert, but making Victoria cast with someone who is like just a really strong actress, regardless of age, I think is important.
I agree.
I'd like to see some of that.
I think my opinion is I think they do need to age her, and I think they do need to recast it like The Crown to have a strong matriarchal character. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I know Daisy Goodwin's like working on I think she's working on another book and some other stuff. So I don't know, like I want her to still be the mind sort of behind all this. And I haven't read the book that this is based on and how far the book goes either. So those are other things I'd consider.
I haven't. I have the book. I've started the book.
I have too, but I haven't. Yeah.
I haven't finished it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about you, Mark? Any closing comments or anything?
Well, I think if you wanted to know where I would end the series, if they decide to go on beyond Albert's death, is I think I would end it with the Golden Jubilee.
The Golden Jubilee.
Yeah, rather than her death. I think that would be a nice place to end it. Rather than ending it with her death, I think that would be a good way to end it.
That's a nice idea too.
And Robert?
I'm not going to be able to top Mark's point.
Sorry.
I think we need to take that one to the bank. That's a good one. I like it. I would probably keep her cast, but I would go with Mark's ending.
Awesome. So I want to thank you, Rob, Robert, and Mark for joining me in this discussion about Victoria. And thank you to the audience for watching our Victoria panel. You can find more about the BritTrack on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and by searching at BritTrack. All right. So thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
DragonCon 2020. Thanks. Everybody stay safe.